Kei te timata, kei ngā marae, ngā mana whenua, ngā hapū, ngā iwi, o tira kia koutou katoa, ko hui hui mai I te ahia nei. Tēnā koutou katoa. Me timata tēnei hui ata I te karakia. Me noi tātou, whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, e hiaki ana te ātākura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko waio, huri au no taupiri, hoi a te waka o tainui, ripo ripo rere ana te wai o Waikato. Tini ngā tātai o tainui, tau mai ko ngā te wairere I mihi ana. He uri a hau no te whānau o te amo, ko Katie te amo a hau. I am the Head of Strategy and Insights here at Taumata Arowai, and it's my privilege and pleasure to be facilitating this webinar today. This is our second of a series of 3 webinars that we will be running over the next couple of months. Warm welcome to those who joined us for our first webinar last year, and a very warm welcome to those who are joining us for the first time today. Nau mai, hara mai. He aha te kai o rangatira, he kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. This whakatauki has helped us, the team, to develop today's webinar. Ideally, we would have loved to have been out in your rohe, kānohi ki te kānohi, talking with you today. I'm sure you'll appreciate the current COVID settings means we need to take some precaution about how we move around the motu. However, we've adapted, like most people have these days, into a virtual setting, but we still really want to provide that space for kōrero and for information exchange. The 2 Q&A sessions that we've built in to our agenda today will help support this. But I do really encourage, if you have questions or comments throughout this 90 minutes that we're together today, please just use your chat function, pop them in there. Before I hand over to Te Puna Chair and Deputy Chair, Tipa Mahuta and Ian Ruru, a couple of things, a couple of tikanga points for our hui ata. When you've come in, your microphone I think has been muted. If we can just use the chat function, as I said, as our main forms of communicating throughout today. As I said, we definitely encourage anytime you have pātai or comments to input them at any time. Also, just so you're aware, we have Te Puna members, board members and Taumata Arowai staff also listening in today or sharing kōrero. If they're sharing kōrero, we will introduce them when the time is right. And I also want to note that we have our Chief Executive, Bill Bayfield, on the line today, and he will be participating throughout the QA sessions, and he will also offer some whakaaro at the end. So next up, I'd really like to take this moment and introduce Tipa Mahuta, Te Puna Chair, and Ingruru, Te Puna Deputy Chair. I'll hand over now to Tipa.
Tēnā hoki tātou katoa, kua hui hui mai nei te rangi nei ki raro I te maru o te kaupapa wai e kōrero tahi nei. Ka tautoko hoki ngā mihi o kia koutou, kia tai mai, te wānanga I wēnei kaupapa, nō reira e ngā mana engari o nau mai, whakatau mai. Tēnā hoki koe Katie, te whakatuwhera I tēnei o ngā hui hui ngā mo te marea kua tai mai. Koe tēnei, no te rua Waikato, no ngā wai o taumārere hoki, Ka noho ki roto I te reo o waikato ki wāhi pā I te rangi nei, nō reira tēnā hoki tātou katoa. Kia ora everybody. I just want to echo Katie's kōrero. Thank you all for joining us today for one of the many information sessions and opportunities to discuss with you the important developments for us as Taumata Arowai, again the freshwater regulator and the work that we must do with our whānau hapū, iwi and marae throughout all our takiwā. So thank you for coming and setting aside this time with us. Again, we look forward to your feedback, your throughput, and how we might make and facilitate these sessions more fully throughout the motu. And you'll hear from our staff today. So Ian and I are here to support that. And I just want to, again, give it over to Ian to introduce himself before we go too much further. Kia ora, Ian.
Kia ora, tupa. Ngā mana I ngā reo, I ngā iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou. Ko chaitanga mahaki, Ngāti Pro, te whakatohia me ngaitai o ku iwi, o tūranga nui e kiwa hau, ko Ian Ruru tuku ingoa, kia ora tātou. Tēnā koe Katie motu karakia ki a tātou, and thank you Tipa for the introduction. I'd like to introduce the other Te Puna board members, if it's possible. I'll just get a slide. Hopefully, is the slide up, Katie?
Aye, it's there for you, Ian.
Oh, sorry, I can't see it. So yeah, we have Tipa Mahuta as our sharp and eloquent chair. We also share two members with the Taumata Arowai board, those being Loreto Lovell, no Rongo Mai Wahine, Ngāti Pahauera, Ngāti Kahungunu and Whakatohia. And Ricky Allison also sits on both boards, Ngāti Toa Rangatira, Mai Tahu and Te Aotearoa. And we have Bonita Begum, no Ngārua Hine, me Te Aotearoa, and Matua Peter Paul, Ngāti Manawa, Ngāti Awa, Mai Tūhoe and Ngāti Whare. So those, we constitute your Te Puna board members. Before I hand it back to Tipa to talk about the MOU and the name of origin of Te Puna, just like to sort of touch on Te Mano Te Wai from my view. I was lucky enough to be brought up by my father, and he downloaded a lot of knowledge about the humble tuna. And those that would know that we're coming up to Puna Ariki, which is the time when this constellation appears and it beckons the tuna heke, so the adult tuna, head back down our rivers, and they're an excellent source of kai and protein, but they're also, I've learned or been taught, that they're also a great sentinel for the modi of the wai. And so relating back to Te Mano Te Wai, Te Mano Te Arowai recognises that the water is a complete ecosystem, and that we should be able to swim or gather mahinga kai for a marae without the fear of getting sick. So essentially we need like a holistic approach to care for its mana and its modi, and that relates back to the role of Taumata Arowai as the drinking water regulator. So the humble tuna is, sort of closely linked to Te Mano Te Wai. So that's sort of my thing as the mahinga kai. So look forward to any questions, particularly on tuna. Happy to try to answer those, and I'll leave the curly questions to the other members. But yeah, kia ora tātou.
Tēnā hoki koe Ian Moera whakamarama. So yes, as Ian stated, two of our members from the Te Puna Advisory are members of the Taumata Arowai board. This is us down at Tūranga Waiwai, where we were able to, at the end of last year, share our sense of Te Mano Te Awa and Te Mano Te Wai along in the Waikato catchment. So we had that opportunity, had to keep it small and non-contact as possible, but again, I acknowledge all the members that made themselves available for that haerenga. I'm fortunate, like Ian, to have grown up alongside the river, and again, Lake Wāhi and our area is known for tuna puhi, so Ian's our eel man too. We've adopted him, no, but also with the saying of, when we needed other types of support and relief, go to the river and find it there, even if it's spiritual solace, time with the tupuna, or those that whakaro, we always send to the river. So that's another aspect of te mana o te wai that we want to bring forward and acknowledge that exists to people in their places. Again, not for us to determine as te puna what te mana o te wai looks like in your area, but more that you are free to express that in the work that we are doing as well. So again, how do we form these partnerships? I was going to say fluid partnerships around the motu, but there's a lot of wai analogies, so that we can work with you towards these outcomes for you in your places and spaces. So Taumata Arowai was established again as the freshwater regulator. Te puna has been established as its internal conscience, I guess, about te mana o te wai and all things tiriti. That is our role. We expect to be speaking more and more into our communities and taking their views, and again, helping to see those given effect in the work of Taumata Arowai. Our name, again, you don't have to be told what a puna is, and we're all our whakatauki, let's say, go back to the source. So again, I think the crucial role we have within Taumata Arowai's policy development, as it reflects all things tiriti and mana o te wai, is expressed through our name of Aropu te puna. Ka pai, e kōrero anō. Kia ora, Katie. Aroha mai. And then so also we have been developing our memorandum of understanding as our two group within our organisation of how we'll give effect to te mana o te wai. So we're near signing off on that, and no doubt a lot of you who are in the policy space or working with groups and collectives will want to understand how we're working together to ensure that all of those things are seamless, and that you don't have to work too hard to explain to us where mana o te wai sits with you and your marae or your takiwā or your rohe. So we're hoping that it's more of an enabler than a definition. The other thing is we understand that you're working with a lot of moving policy parts to give effect to your mana o te wai, whether it's through the work in the freshwater space or in the three waters, and so we hear your expectation that we're working seamlessly about how te mana o te wai is treated across all of those different entity opportunities and obligations. So kia ora tātou. Kia koe, Katie.
Thank you so much, Tipa and Ian, for sharing your reflections and talking more about te mana o te wai and your aspirations for te puna, the board, and Taumata Arowai. Tēnei te mihi kia kōrero. Now just turning to our second speaker before we then head into a QA session. So our second speaker is Raukura Huata. She's one of our principal advisors here in Taumata Arowai. She's been really concentrating and doing a lot of work recently in getting out across around the motu, virtually and in person where possible, to understand the concerns of our whānau hapū iwi. Over to you, Raukura. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe hoa. O tira, ea kuranga tira tēnā tātou. E nei kanohi e mohi o tia nei, nau mai hara mai ki tēnei puna kōrero. He uri tēnei no Ngāti Kahungunu no Ngāti Porou me ngā iwi whānui, o tēnei pito o te ao, o te aroa waka kei konei au, kei Rotorua. E hui tahi nei ki ngā māngai, ki ngā rangatira a te aroa waka. Nā reira, tēnei te mihi kia tātou. Raukura Huata, I joined te Taumata Arowai in October last year to help support on the Te Ao Māori workstream and to explore, I guess, the conversations around what it means to give effect to te mana o te wai in context to safe drinking water. And most recently have kicked off kanohi ki te kanohi engagement. It's been slowed down due to COVID. And so we've got protocols in place to ensure that our whānau are on the ground, and kaimahi e Taumata Arowai, kei te haere haumaru tātou katoa. I guess for context, Taumata Arowai has inherited circa 125 registered marae, kura kaupapa, kohanga reo, papakainga, and small rural communities that are densely populated with Māori. So that's a list of about 125 that we have prioritised our engagement with versus the, I guess, the non-Māori list, which is circa 1,200. So we're working through that, the Māori supplier list at the moment to transfer, number one, to educate about actually what Te Taumata Arowai is, to start building relationships, to understand the complex needs of our whānau communities, and then to, I guess, look at how we can transfer from the Ministry of Health database to Te Taumata Arowai database, what we've named Hine Kōrako. In these huinga across the motu, we've heard the very complex issues of why, not just drinking water, but the way that we as Māori see wai as a whole. Ko tātou, he tangata whenua, he tangata ngahere, he tangata wai. And it is impossible for us to separate drinking water from every other wai that we connect to. Nā reira, the ultimate goal in these engagements is to not only understand, but then also to work collectively with our marae communities and also alongside our thought leaders at our iwi level to find solutions that actually work for our whānau. I'll leave it there. Engari, mehe mehe pātai wā tātou, kei konei au, hei whakautu I era. Kia ora maira.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koe, Raukura. Thank you very much for your update, for some insight into the mahi that you've been leading, and also providing that background context as well. Whānau mā, we're just about to head into a QA session. We've had a couple of comments on the chat, but no questions as such. Just while people are maybe collecting their thoughts or having a think about a curly question for one of us, I'd just like to plug our website, taumataarawai.govt.nz. There's a lot of information on the website at the moment, and that also includes one of our very first kaupapa videos, which stars Tipa as our Chair of Te Puna, Board Chair Dan Karen Potasi, and Chief Executive Bill Bayfield. And so if you're ever after a refresher around the purpose and the kaupapa of Taumata Arowai, that is a really great video to check out. So that's on our website, taumataarawai.govt.nz. And that also includes ways in which you can email us or communicate back to us. One of the pānui that I have, and this good timing in terms of just hearing from Chair and Deputy Chair of Te Puna, as some of you may know, the Department of Internal Affairs, the monitoring department for Taumata Arowai, and they are just about, well, they are in the process of running an appointment process for a new Te Puna member, so for a 7th Te Puna member. And there is information and a nomination form which we can provide out to people, and it will also eventually be available on our website. Now, just out of the corner of my eye, I think I saw Kia ora Kepa. Nice to have you here on our webinar with us today. All right, I'm going to pause for 10 seconds, see if any pātai come through. If not, we'll move through the agenda through our speakers, and then we can use longer for the second Q&A session if we need to. All right, Raukura, we have a question coming through for you. So the question is from Dr. Kepa Morgan. From the outreach so far, are you getting an insight into how support will be provided to our marae? Oh, great question. Over to you, Raukura.
Tēnā koe e te pāpā. So yes, and I guess the support that's required is incredibly complex, from understanding how to navigate the end-to-end process, that is from registrations to what is a safe water drinking plan, and what support's going to be provided on the ground to, I guess, aki and tautoko, being a part of the Hine Kōrako system, all the way through to the very technical end of, right, so now that we've done the, I guess, the more administrative tasks, what are these very complex systems and who is going to take care of them? And so our job really is to ensure that there is sufficient information that actually supports marae and papakainga in particular, who, you know, as we've seen at Raupunga, for example, Matua Guy and Whaia Teresa are volunteers. They work, you know, in the community, and then after hours they are going to check the water supply and clear the silt. And so, yeah, one is the technical end, and then the other one is, well, actually who's going to be there to front and manage our water supply systems. So that's a role that we have to sorry, that's a job for us to look back in and consider. And certainly advice would be put up to the board to, I guess, ensure that the right navigational tools are in place to support our marae and papakainga.
Tēnā koe, Raukura. Thank you for that.
And if I can just add...
Sorry, you froze for a second.
Oh. Sorry, and if I can just add, you know, we are all mindful of the cost of compliance, and so there's a fair amount of work that we have to do to identify pockets of funding that might be available, whether that's at a marae working with the treaty settlements, you know, your own post-treaty settlements entities, or whether that's exploring funding opportunities that might be available in Crown spaces.
Kia ora e hoa, thank you for that. So that's our pātai that's come through. I think if anything else comes through immediately, we will, I'll queue up our next speaker, which is our Head of Regulatory, Ray McMillan, who's going to provide a little bit more information about our kaupapa next steps, and provide you with some visuals which talk you through our roadmaps. So without further ado, over to you, Ray. Thank you.
Kia ora ngamahi Katie. Ngamahi o te rā, kia koutou, i ngā whānau, ko ai au, no ko te rāna o ki tūpina i tipu ake a hau i manu rewa, ki raro te maru e te iwi o te Waiohua, engari ki wainui e māta a hau e noho ana, and Ray McMillan, toko ingoa, and Head of Regulatory Taumata Arowai. Yeah, so I thought what might be really useful is just talking through, I guess, the steps that Taumata Arowai are taking to bring the regulatory framework to life, and what that means depending on whether you were registered as a drinking water supplier with the Ministry of Health, and if you weren't registered as a supplier with the Ministry of Health, what that means for you in terms of timeframes. So we inherited some information, the register, from the Ministry of Health a little bit before we took over as the regulator from the 15th of November last year. and we saw that there were a number of marae already registered, but we didn't have a lot of information about those marae, who the contacts were, where they were, the reasons why they ended up on the register. So we think that's around 75 to 80 marae. So we needed to know more, and that's the process we're going through now, and Raikura has spoken to that in terms of starting to engage, to understand. And the reason we need to understand specifically for the 75 to 80 marae is because there's some things that are different depending on whether you are registered or not. But one of the key things we understand is that the registered marae offer us a really important opportunity to understand, so to listen and understand, to see whether or not the things that we've designed are fit for purpose and work for marae, but also engage in that opportunity or that kōrero to understand if there are some things we might need to do that are a little bit different. So currently, what we're doing is we're in the process of reaching out and contacting the marae, and Raikura has that in hand. And we're doing that through our regional offices as well. So you've got Peter, who you'll hear from shortly. He can talk to you about some of the experiences and the learnings that we're getting from that engagement. We're currently seeking feedback on I guess the first set of revised drinking water standards, the compliance rules, some acceptable solutions, which I'll talk about in terms of what they are, to see whether they're fit for purpose for the sector in general, so anyone who's a drinking water supplier. But also it's really, really important that that we get that feedback from marae and papakainga in terms of how they fit and will they work for their specific situations. The idea is that we'll have this exchange of information, and that'll allow us to develop and finalise the set of rules, the first set, and to bring them into effect. We're hoping around July this year. So what that means then is that all the drinking water suppliers across New Zealand will then be able to prepare their drinking water safety plans and submit those by November. So that's the general timeline that the Water Services Act sets out for all drinking water suppliers who were registered with the Ministry of Health prior to the 15th of November last year. If we can go to the next slide, please. So if you were unregistered, there's quite a different time frame. Have we gone two ahead? Was that the first one? No, that's unregistered. So unregistered suppliers, you've got a lot more time, and the reason for that is we know that there are a large number of unregistered suppliers right across the motu, and there's a lot more unregistered marae papakainga suppliers that we need to understand as well, those numbers. So the decision was made when the Water Services Act was enacted to give the unregistered suppliers a lot more time to meet compliance. So for an unregistered supply, you have until well, you have 4 years essentially until November 2025 to register with Taumata Arowai. So that's to register your supply, and then there's another 3 years from that point in time to have lodged your first drinking water safety plan, which means meeting the compliance requirements or obligations under the Water Services Act. So with that in mind, I think if you're unregistered, it's still a really, really important opportunity to look at what we've put out in terms of those documents that we're seeking feedback from, because we really, really are interested in everybody's view and how you see those drinking water standards, those compliance rules, and those acceptable solutions impacting you in terms of how you supply water as well. And you can get that through the Taumata Arowai website, and I think we'll put out some information in terms of how you can access those discussion documents. And I think that's in the next slide actually. So these are the things that we're currently seeking your feedback on. We've revised the drinking water standards, so that enlarges essentially the number of things that water suppliers are required to test for, and updates them. We've developed some drinking water assurance rules, but this is how you monitor and the kinds of barriers and protections you need to put in place. And then we've got the aesthetic values, which is about how the water looks, tastes, and how it smells. We've also created 3 acceptable solutions, and acceptable solutions are a ready-made solution that you can implement. So if you implement an acceptable solution, it takes care of your drinking water safety plan, and it means you don't need to comply with those compliance rules. So it's a ready-made solution if it works for your particular supply. There's 3 of those: roof water supplies, spring and bore water supplies, and rural and agricultural supplies. We're also really interested in people's views about the information we're asking for to understand how the distribution networks are performing in their environment. So there's a discussion document in that package of information as well. You can lodge any feedback you want us to look at through the Te Puna Kōrero tool. And that makes it really, really easy for people to submit feedback, and that's open until the 28th of March 2022. Kia ora. So I think I'd just like to now introduce Peter Wood, who's our regulatory team leader in Papaioia, Palmerston North, and he'll just talk to you about some of the examples and some of the experiences he's had in engaging with marae and hapū. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Ray. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi o ki te maunga o Ruapehu, ko Manawatuta Awa, no ingarangi o ku tipuna, e noho ana aho ki te Papaioia, ko Peter Wood aho. Yes, I'm Peter Wood. I'm the regulatory team leader here in Palmerston North, and I've yes, so I'm have been involved in the sector in various forms for a long period of time, since about 1990. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about the acceptable solutions that we have, and just a little bit each one individually, and then some of the things that we have been, all the ways that we have been engaging. So the first of these acceptable solutions that we have published is about roof water drinking water supplies. So these are the rainwater catchment systems. In my experience, lots and lots of marae rely on the roof water catchment for their drinking water. The rainwater is typically very good as it falls out of the sky, and then it hits the roof, and what goes on with the way that our roofs are is what affects the water itself. And I know that from time to time there have been issues with aerial top dressing, where the people who have been spraying fertiliser over paddocks have decided not to avoid the roof that people have been drinking from. So this acceptable solution looks at those roof supplies and how those can be, how the water can be protected and how it can be made safe if something goes wrong. So there's a link there in terms of what to look for. The solution focuses very much on filtration and UV to remove anything that has collected on the roof out of the water that's landed there. Next slide, please. Spring and bore drinking water supplies. We have got lots and lots again of small supplies for marae and Papakainga and other communities that rely on water that naturally comes out of the ground. And some of these, the water that comes out of the ground is beautiful water, clear, lovely tasting. Some of them less so, and it's very difficult. What we have tried to do is set up a solution here that will work for the bulk of the supplies that get spring or bore water. Key to this solution is the characteristics of the water that is coming out the ground. And so if you are in an area that relies on spring and bore water, we'd really be keen to hear from you and receive your feedback around this acceptable solution and whether what we have is going to work for the bulk of these supplies, and where we might have challenges moving forward. The third slide, the third acceptable solution we have is the rural agricultural drinking water supply solution. And this, so there are lots of supplies that where a lot of water goes for agricultural purposes or non-drinking purposes, and then a number of houses and marae tap into what is primarily a supply that was never originally designed for people to drink. So this acceptable solution looks at a point of entry approach, so endpoint treatment. So instead of saying we've got this this water supply where we're instead of treating the vast volumes of water that people are never going to drink, we're just proposing a solution that only covers treating the relatively small proportion of water that is consumed. And so that those solutions, those three acceptable solutions are up on our website for feedback. And we're very keen to know whether they will work for the supplies that we've with those characteristics. The acceptable solutions are all being piloted by Department of Internal Affairs. So we're testing them to make sure so that we've got an idea whether they work or not. We're having a look at the costs of implementing these acceptable solutions, and we're also looking at the costs of implementing the drinking water standards and rules more generally. And the proposal of this is to try and provide suppliers with some information on the relative costs between the acceptable solutions compared with the quality assurance rules, and hopefully that will help with making an informed decision about what's best for the particular supply we're talking about. The acceptable solutions are not mandatory, so they're an optional. They're an option that you can choose to adopt, and they don't cover every type of supply. So we don't have at the moment an acceptable solution up there for supplies or marae that might, or communities that might collect from streams. Or surface water intakes like lakes, and so I think that's an important point that to raise. My approach is to try. I think we can't really understand the water system unless we actually go and visit the water system and talk to the people involved, and I'd acknowledge Guy Taylor and Teresa Thornton for their hospitality in welcoming Raukura and myself to Raupunga. And I've put up some photos. Raupunga is a fantastic little supply. And I've got some photos here of the 3-stage filtration process that they have on that water, which is sand filter, multimedia filter, and cartridge filtration in that sequence. And so the Raupunga water system takes water from the nearby stream, and the nearby stream can change dramatically, but Guy can choose when he takes the water and make sure that he's only taking water at the times when the treatment system can cope and store enough water for the community in large tanks. Once it's got through the filtration system, and next slide, please. yes, the water is then treated with UV light. So essentially, it's although it's an artificial process, the idea is that we sunburn anything nasty to death if it might have been in the stream itself, and then is chlorinated. And so this is a small water system for a community, essentially funded by or run for the community, by the community, for the community, and is well set up. Lovely treatment plant, lovely neat supply. And we can't really understand what is going on in the sector without actually going and visiting and seeing these things, because you can get so much from the photo, but being on site and talking to Guy was invaluable, and Teresa was invaluable, and I really did appreciate that time there. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora Peter, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi Ray, kia ora kōrero. I think really in your presentation there, Peter, and your kōrero, you tied together the themes that have already come through from Te Pae and Raukura, particularly around te mano te wai being place-based, and then also, you know, that importance of really understanding who we are working with and understanding their characteristics and complexities. So kia ora, kōrero. Whānau, as you've seen, oh great, we've got some questions coming through now for our panel. I've got our Chief Executive, Bill Bayfield. He's primed and ready to answer one here that we've got from Darren, which is just wondering how all the different groups are working together and what their functions are. So talking specifically about the National Transition Unit, which is part of DIA, and the Three Waters Steering Committee. So many more, but those are the names I've seen the most. Does Taumata Arowai work with them directly, or do you focus on developing our water regulation framework and the other groups work off the information you release? Oh, he pātai pai. Over to you, Bill.
Tēnā tātou. Lovely to have a chance to chat with you again. Look, Darren's question's a great question, and because really it's part of what I think Rao Kura was referring to, and our work with marae and hapū around the motu, in that there is so much going on in the water space. When we look at the changes that are going on just down the road from us in terms of Ministry of the Environment and the RMA, they're huge. When we look up the road at DIA and how they're powering into the Three Waters service delivery reform, which is kind of the second part of us, but we're already formed, we're already started. So we're kind of closely connected with both of those. We try and influence them, we try and work with them, we try and understand them, and occasionally we succeed and occasionally we don't. So your question, Darren, was, are all the different groups working together and what are their functions are? I'd say yes, they should be, and yes, most of the time they are, but you'd be surprised how many times I don't think we present a coherent face to the community out there, and particularly iwi Māori, particularly when you know iwi Māori and their kind of the way they see why and the way they understand it. We were up in Te Arawa Federation 2 days ago this week, and that was certainly their perspective, as they asked a lot of questions of us that were all round water. Even though we were there to answer for Taumata Arowai, we were able to supply them with as much information as we could. You're asking specifically about the National Transition Unit, which is basically part of the Three Waters Service Delivery Reform. That's the unit that's setting about now to possibly form the 4 major water entities that'll take the assets off local government, not take the assets off iwi Māori, not take the assets off marae or hapū-based systems, but to take the assets off local government and put them into 4 entities. That group we are staying quite closely aligned with. We're very interested in what they do and how they set themselves up and what they're focusing on. They're a little nervous. One of the areas they're a bit nervous as that unit sets up is just how many small suppliers, whether they be iwi or Māori or whether they be rural, might decide that they no longer want to supply water and might hand over their systems to the 4 entities and thereby give the 4 entities quite a significant workload. There's been a lot of talk about this, mostly from the rural communities, mostly from the farming communities. I haven't heard it as much from iwi Māori. In fact, I've heard the reverse, which is if you guys have got a decent water supply, you're going to hang on to it for everything you can. And I absolutely support that. But there are a lot, and what I'd hope we could be is the source of anything you want to know about the others, because we're watching them like hawks. So if you want to use part of this webinar or part of contact with Katie, myself, or the rest of the team that are on today, don't hesitate to use us to find out what's going on. We'll tell you as best we can. Before I finish that question, I really liked Keppa's questions. I always do. And so I think that our outreach that we're doing at the moment is teaching us an awful lot of what we don't know about marae and hapū and kaianga. And I guess it's teaching us a lot of how we can work with iwis and iwi in particular, who can coordinate and help marae and hapū go through our relatively simple process of registration, verification, and writing a really simple drinking water safety plan. Those that are registered with us, the 120 odd, that they're really our focus for the rest of the year. But I think we don't know yet exactly how the kind of funds or the resources will be available to, shall we say, upgrade those systems if they need to be upgraded, and that's a real challenge. And I guess the second part of your question that I saw there, I absolutely agree with you. If we're now writing marae in particular into civil defence arrangements all through the motu, then those marae have to have a really good water supply, and that's a robust and resilient water supply. And so I think that angle of yours to drive for decent funding for anywhere that you want to use as an emergency operations centre in an emergency is a really good one.
Kia ora, Bill. Thank you very much for those comprehensive answers and whakaaro in relation to 2 questions. We've got Mr. Wood ready to come back into the spotlight. We've got 3 questions that will be directed for Peter to answer. I might start off with the question from Owen. So Peter, can you please give us any idea of the capex and opex of Raupunga Water?
I can't give a good, I don't have a very good or detailed understanding of how much it cost, but we're, in terms of the capex, it was the funding was originally partly subsidised through the Ministry of Health Capital Assistance Programme. So the TAP and CAP scheme. I think the key questions that I'm speaking with Guy about is how much is it going to cost the supply to meet the current the proposed rules, and where will there be upgrades, and what are the operational costs likely to be? How much are the costs going to increase, and what does this mean? And also, I think the other question that I'm wrestling with is the rules, are the rules as written fit for purpose for that particular supply? Are there some, because that supply has 3-stage filtration, does it quite make sense that the comparing that to the filtration requirements that are currently written in the rules that we have? So those conversations are ongoing, and I think the operating costs, I think money is tight. I think that's the best way of describing that particular system.
Kia ora, thank you, Peter. Now on to your second one. So this is from Shirley, and so this is around the effect of fertilisers being applied to farmland So you mentioned that, but there doesn't appear to
Yep.
be mention of herbicides, pesticides and poisons used for animal control that are regularly used around water supplies in the dialogue. So the question I think centres on what is the monitoring process around these to ensure the water supply is suitable for drinking?
Right. So this is a and Kia ora, Shirley, and I apologise. Sometimes actually we are talking about poisons that get put on land that affect the water supply. Very true. So I'm going to talk a little bit about current state and future state, if that makes sense. So at the moment, there is very little monitoring of sources of water for drinking for chemicals, and I think it's actually currently a big hole in terms of what we are considering. So what I think the next stage is what Taumata Arowai is proposing, and so what we have in our drinking water quality assurance rules and is a set of things to monitor source water for. This will be the first time that we're looking at monitoring of source water for those contaminants, those herbicides, pesticides, and other things that are used in the catchment. And in context with that, I would also like to mention that Ministry for the Environment has got a discussion document out on improving the protection of drinking water sources for involving what is the National Environmental Standard for protection of sources of human drinking water. So I would have to say that I'm optimistic, and I'm pleased that the future state is moving, I think, in the right direction, where we will be looking at what is in the water, and we'll also be trying to improve the protection of the water. Those two things go hand in hand.
Kia ora, Peter. I might give you a short break. I'll come back to the question from Keeper Morgan, but in the meantime, we've got another great pātai that's come through from Darren, which I'm going to pass through to Ray McMillan. And so this is around, so a lot of small suppliers are wondering how compliance will be administered and who foots the bill for testing and monitoring. When a supplier is registered, does a sampling technician come every so often to sample and test the water, or does the supplier have to send samples in a bottle to a lab for testing, then provide results to Taumata Arowai?
Kia ora, Katie. Great question, Darren. The straightforward answer to that is the Water Services Bill sets up some clear responsibility for water suppliers to manage those risks and that duty of care to deliver safe drinking water to whoever they're delivering that drinking water to. The responsibility for making sure that the water is safe, testing and understanding what's in the water is with the water supplier. So no, there's no plans at this stage. Certainly Taumata Arowai isn't being set up under the Water Services Act to provide that, but we're the organisation that sets the standards, sets the requirements, so that operators are clear about what those expectations are, and then we receive that monitoring data back to us periodically. That's set out in those water quality assurance rules, and when there are occasions when a MAV might be exceeded, or there's a transgression in terms of meeting the drinking water standards, the laboratories will notify us of that, as well as a supplier having a commensurate responsibility to send that information through to Taumata Arowai as well. So we provide an oversight role, but the planning and the managing the risk, the giving effect of that duty of care, and making sure that we're giving effect to Te Manu o Te Wai rests with the operator.
Kia ora, thank you, Ray, for that answer. Then I've got the next question I'll direct to Peter. So that's from Dr. Keeper Morgan. So Peter, are you considering ozone as an alternative to chlorine?
Kia ora. The short answer is sort of yes and sort of no. So there is certainly in our quality assurance, drinking water quality assurance rules, we have a rules that we are proposing for ozone. But those rules in terms of whether it will fully replace chlorine or not, ozone, the residual tends not to last as long, so it doesn't necessarily do the same job. So it is, but there is rules for ozone in the rules. What we don't have is an acceptable solution that uses ozone or other oxygen based compounds like hydrogen peroxide. And so I think that there's so the answer in terms of your so the answer to your question is it is under consideration, but it's not in the acceptable solutions at this point. And I think the other thing I should say here is that even what we have in the quality assurance rules and is an indication of the treatments that are readily available and widely used now. And I think we're having a discussion on future state, what sort of innovations are going to be coming through that may, we want to be able to be responsive and actually have an idea of where we can adapt and change as our information improves and as new and perhaps safer treatments come through. So I think there's a lot more work to do in terms of some of those chlorine alternatives in the future.
Parawe, Peter, thank you. Then I have a question for Bill coming from Ana. Most of our kohanga reo across the motu and marae based, the education pathway for our moko rangatahi and ongoing adult learning to participate and advocate is developing as part of Taumata Arowai. Over to you, Bill.
Kia ora, Ana. If I've understood the question, you're talking about how might we be sort of promoting, if you like, understanding and value of water through your learning pathways, and that's a big challenge for us. In particular, really when you think about it as a regulator, we're 3 months old, so believe me, we're right now we're kind of in the very early stages of coming to grips with how we register people and how we make sure we've got good data and supply that. Nevertheless, we're thinking about the future, and so we're working very closely at the moment with a group of educators, if I could call them that. They speak a different language to me, I have to admit, but they're working through the changes that are occurring to the Polytechnic through Te Pūkenga, and so we're working with them looking at kind of how do you promote knowledge of drinking water in the water sector? How do you promote an understanding of drinking water and what you have to do to look after it from kaiutu kitai? And so we're working on that with a view to not just improving people's understanding of water, but also their desire to be engaged in it as an industry, their desire to see an opportunity, a career for them. Because when you look at the lack of investment that's occurred in New Zealand in terms of drinking water and wastewater in particular, there's a huge gap. And so we see this as a huge opportunity for place-based, I guess, people who can service small schemes and who can grow and take part in big schemes and the big four entities as well. That side of our work is probably going to get taken over a bit by the NTU that Darren referred to, the National Transition Unit for the four entities. because they've really got to look as to how they grow their workforce and how they grow the understanding of their community about what they do and the value in what they do. So I wouldn't say, I would say we've only made tentative steps now, but I would say that it's absolutely, it's part of our legislation that we have to look at how we grow New Zealanders' awareness of water, their value of water, and how we also promote opportunities to ensure that the water sector has sufficient smart people to help us do the right thing.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. E te whānau, thank you very much for all the great pātai that have been coming through. As I was saying early in the introduction, this is not the only kōrero or the end of the kōrero. You can always reach out and communicate or exchange with us through our website, through the email address on that. And of course, we will have another webinar in the very near future. Before I ask Tipper and Bill for their closing comments, I understand that we have a last minute guest speaker, and this ties to the kōrero that Peter gave in regard to raupunga. So we have got Guy online who is at the very last minute jumped in and agreed to give us a little bit of a kōrero just to back up and give some meaning, further meaning to what Peter was talking about. So if I can now invite Guy, if you can join us, hopefully you'll be able to unmute yourself from where you are, Guy. Kia ora mātou, I'll just get you to please just, if you can on your end, unmute yourself. I'll let you know once sound comes through our end. All right, I'll just give Mātua a couple of minutes to hopefully work out or be able to sort out the technology on his side. While that's happening, I might just invite Tipper to share any final kōrero or whakaaro before we then go back to Mātua Guy.
That's what we're waiting for you, Mātua. Probably just want to acknowledge the networks that you already have influence and work in, everybody that's online. I see you here, Maria, from the Māori Land Court again. There are other expert organisations and working with marae, and we look forward to creating those opportunities for Taumata Arowai to work with you, other agencies and other marae clusters. So we are aware of groups of marae communities working together. Please just refer them in so that we can start the long cup of tea conversation with them. Again, the urgency more is to connect meaningfully rather than to see a whole lot of projects going on. And just want to again acknowledge your participation today. If there are any outstanding comments or information you require, please contact our team so that they can follow it up with you. So again, I just want to mahi to everybody that's been here today, and Mātua Guy, I really hope you're ready because I can't wait to hear your live example too. The little poo here, kia ora.
Tēnā koe Tifa, and then if I can please pass to Bill to see if Bill has any closing comments before we check in again with Mātua Guy.
Kia ora tātou. I find it really illuminating just to take part in these. So I think they're not that big or difficult for us to fire up. So the more frequently we can do them, the more we can spread the message. You've reaffirmed for me the message that we might be one little bit of the water story, the water reform, the water change, and the water change needs to occur in New Zealand, but we're only one bit of it. Nevertheless, we need to be as broad as we can and kind of providing you with access and understanding of how we fit and how you might see us and value us. At the same time, we can provide answers to any questions you might have on any of the other bits of the water reform that are going on. And I think that we as an organisation have to be cognizant of that and be prepared to spend time over that cup of tea and talk about that. I also think that it behoves me to just request to you something that didn't come up today, but I'm very much aware of at the moment is it would be lovely if you could feel strongly enough to pick up the phone or send an email or send a message by whatever means you chose to do to contact us should you receive any strange request from someone who wants to measure your water supply or can sort everything out for you at a significant cost, or as we've already heard, someone who suggests you join a district council water supply promptly without really giving you any reason why. I would strongly recommend all marae kāinga take this slowly. You have years to work this through with us. You have years to consider your options. Don't let anyone tell you you've got to do it fast, and we will work with you until you're ready to make the decision about what best fits your family, your whānau, your location. And I guess that's really important for me. You're something quite special in New Zealand. We regard you so. And if we're a little bit late in meeting our deadlines because we have a better conversation and can work something through with you, then we'd be only too happy to do that.
Kia ora Bill, rawa ko Tipa for those closing comments. We almost made it through the full webinar without too many drastic technical issues until this point here. I just give my humble apologies to Mātua Guy. I think if you're free and available, Mātua, next time perhaps we can invite you to be a very special guest for a webinar in the next series and really draw on your experiences, your challenges for running a drinking water supply, particularly one at Opunga. Apologies, we couldn't make a spontaneously great suggestion and idea work at this time. Whānau, I think we are in the process of wrapping up here. I just really want to thank everybody again for making time. I know it's a very, very busy time for everybody at the moment. And so I thank you for coming to our webinar today. I just reiterate, I guess, what Bill was saying. Please do feel free to pick up the phone or get in touch with us if anything hasn't been clear, or as he says, if you have anybody providing you information that you're just not quite sure about. Again, I'd just like to plug our website one more time. At some point in the near future, we will have a recording of this webinar up on there, and the webinar recording of the webinar plus a high-level summary of the kōrero today will also be sent out to those of you here today. Additionally, I see some of you have popped a comment into the chat box. So really appreciate the feedback, but if you do ever have any time and would like to provide us some feedback on how we may improve the webinar that we run, please do feel free to provide that as well. On that note, whānau, I'm going to close our webinar today. I hope you all stay safe and well in your homes. Mino tātou ki te karakia whakamutunga. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātea, kia māma te nākau, te tinana, te wairu a ra tangata, koe rā e rongo whakairia, ake ki runga, kia tīna, haumie, huie, tākie. Kia haumaru te whānau. Thank you again, and ka kite.